welcome to this meeting, this extraordinary meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I start off with apologies. We've received apologies from Carolyn and David Jacobs is standing in for. Thank you very much, David. You're welcome. And David Woolacombe is unable to join us, so he's being substituted by Stephen Watson. Thank you, Stephen. Minutes.
Two more apologies, sorry, Chair, as well, from Councillor Swainston and Councillor Thomas.
Okay, thank you. Good. Minutes. I've got a couple of changes at (207), the fourth paragraph, which waxes eloquent in the latter part about me assuring members that I was in discussion with the leader regularly in terms of forward plan, etc. I'm going to propose we delete that because it's A, it's not true, and B, I don't recall saying that at that point. However, moving swiftly forward at 209, probably over the page because it's para 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I did actually say how much the Vice Chairman and I were looking forward to meeting with the leader and the deputy leader to discuss the forward plan and the work programme. And the leader was kind enough to use non-verbal communication in the meeting to suggest that that was going to happen, and afterwards assured me that we would. So I would just like to change that. I think we'll delete it again because it's not. So what I'm proposing is at 209 we substitute how I mentioned that I was looking forward, together with the Vice Chairman, to be able to meet with the leader and the deputy leader of the overview to discuss the work programme in overview and scrutiny terms. So if you're content with that, we haven't established whether anybody else has got any queries yet. Peter.
It's not a query about the minutes, Chairman. I've just opened my ModGov app to find. I've read the papers for this meeting this morning. I've just opened the app, and there is a new document that has appeared there called Agenda Version 2. Can somebody please explain what that is and what the differences are between the original agenda before I open it?
If it's agenda, it's not me, but if it's appendix 2.
It is an appendix. No, it says agenda.
It says Agenda Version 2.
Okay, that's
an appendix with some financial information.
And when was that posted? Because it wasn't there this morning. There was a supplementary agenda number 1.
Peter, I'm not entirely sure this. Can we park this for a minute? Because
I'm just don't know
sure
what meeting
it's to do with these minutes
we're having.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that, but the minutes as in front of you.
Okay.
Are you?
I don't know because which agenda am I looking at?
Which set of minutes attached to which agenda are you looking at?
Exactly.
Can anybody advise? You're our minutes guru.
The agenda was published some days ago, and there's been no new version of it. But there is a one appendix, which is.
And
I'd like to just establish what you've got minutes. What did I see? Somebody else's? Did I see anybody else? No. Okay. Nobody can add anything on with regard to this. No.
Can't go through it all. It looks the same.
I think the best thing to do is park this for the moment, and we'll come back to it. Chairman's announcements. I'll try and keep them to 25 minutes or so. I have none. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Yes, Eric.
Thanks, Chairman. I think I need to note my role in county. So I'm Chair of Herts Waste Partnership, and my portfolio role at county is environment, which includes waste disposal and lead local flood authority, both of which are relevant to decisions made here this evening. Well, not here this evening, but later on.
Yes,
Thank
I'm
you,
sure
Chairman.
we can all grasp that. Yep, that's
Sure.
good. Okay, thank you.
Chair. Yeah, I would like to declare that I'm Eric's Deputy Executive Member at County Council, and I sit on the Regional Flood Climate Change for this area as well.
Excellent, thank you. Any more? No? Peter, have we arrived yet? Are you?
Well, I'm not reading through all 50 pages of the.
Well,
what
the
appears
minutes
to
are
be
not
a-
50 pages, but
I'm sticking with the original one that I've already gone through.
okay. And you're content with that?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Would somebody propose that we accept the minutes? And Julie second. Thank you, Miriam. Have a seconder? Rachel? Fabulous. Okay. I will sign them in due course because obviously they have to be amended. Yeah. So, can we have a quick vote, show of hands? Yes, I did. Sorry, Sue. It's all right. It gets to you after. I blame puberty. It's all those hormones. Yeah, quite. Yeah, can we have a vote, please? Yeah, all content? I think that's okay. Okay, thank you very much. So we move on to the substantive business of the evening, which is item 5 on the agenda, waste recycling and street cleansing contract service design.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. The waste recycling and street cleansing service represents the largest spend on services contracts each financial year. It's a high-profile service which impacts on residents every week, and as well as having a huge impact on the council's finances, it also has significant impacts and influences on the council's ability to achieve its carbon reduction and sustainability aims for the district. Reducing waste and recycling more, reducing the carbon impacts of sending residual waste to landfill or energy from waste facilities are critical elements. During the summer of 2022 and prior to the finalisation of the contract specification, officers worked with members across the political parties and from our partners at North Herts Council to help design services which would meet our financial and environmental sustainability objectives. Executive agreed the service design for the new waste recycling and street cleansing contract on the 25th of October 2022, along with new aims and principles of the shared service based around delivering services which are both financially and environmentally sustainable. The initial tenders that we received identified that there were affordability issues from the waste recycling and street cleansing services in the next contract. A competitive dialogue procurement process is currently ongoing, and this has allowed officers who are leading the process to explore service design options which may present benefits to the council. Officers are seeking a decision from this discussion on the service design options that will be taken forward with the intention of supporting the long-term financial sustainability of the service and the council. To add to the context in which this process is taking place, on the 21st of October 2023, the government published its response to its consultation on the resources and waste strategy, which resulted in proposed legislative and statutory guidance changes. Officers are in the process of reviewing the information and have already and will continue to respond to further consultation on the statutory guidance aimed at supporting the government's simpler recycling proposals. Some elements of the government's legislative and statutory guidance changes are not aligned with the current contract specification, but at this stage there is insufficient clarity to make any formal decisions. It is expected that further decisions will be required in mid-2024 once detail is known. Officers will work with consultants Eunomia and legal representative Sharp Pritchard to ensure that the procurement exercise can progress as far as reasonably practical on its current timeline and provide sufficient opportunities for any necessary changes required to the specification. Now, whilst this paper has a relatively simple recommendation, there is a wealth of detail, as you will appreciate it reading it, contained within it, and with the proposals. The proposals are summarised in 3.2a to k. The confidential financial impacts are tabled in Part 2, Appendix 2, and there are some further details on the 333 collection regime contained at Appendix 3. These proposals result from the competitive dialogue between officers and the various bidders and represent an opportunity to support a critical outcome, namely the long-term financial sustainability of the new contracts. I wonder, with your permission, Chair, if we could try and target the questioning to work sequentially through the recommendations. It may not be absolutely possible, but it'll allow the points to be fully explored each in turn. And allow a sort of composite picture to be built up before the overall recommendation is thought through. Officers are confident that these changes will still provide high-performing services. Indeed, the waste and recycling service design proposed gives residents more opportunity to recycle by providing more recycling capacity. Many of the other proposals merely allow bidders more flexibility in their operations. A final decision is needed to progress with the procurement and not delay the mobilisation of the contract. Due to extremely tight timescales, it will not be possible to bring a further report to Executive without delaying the procurement by a further 3 months. This would reduce the mobilisation time from approximately 13 months to around 10 months, an impact on the successful mobilisation of the contract, including but not limited to the ability to procure new vehicles in time for the contract start and sufficiently check data for new waste IT systems and set up IT integrations. As I said before, the recommendation is very simple, but it belies the complexity within those individual clauses. So the recommendations for overview and scrutiny are to receive, consider and provide feedback to the Executive on the proposals outlined in this report.
Lovely, thank you very much. Perhaps I could just open quickly. You mentioned vehicles. When we started the last contract, I'm very conscious of the fact there was this question of vehicles and getting them ready and in time for the mobilisation. So the mobilisation date is 13 months hence, which is when?
May 2025.
Thank you. The new vehicles disappeared quite quickly in the last contract. About 18 months down track, we didn't have so many vehicles, but we had an awful lot of ones with Coventry written on. It seems to be my recollection, but perhaps it's mistaken. Just to inform, what's the vehicle life for I mean, we're talking about what, the 11.5 ton compacting.
Yeah, it does somewhat depend. Some contracts will depreciate over 7 years. This contract, we're expecting bidders to depreciate the vehicles over 8 years. Things like small sweepers tend to have a 4-year life, but it's starting to appear that the electric fleet will have a much longer life of more like 10 years. So it does depend on the vehicle.
So it's the engines and gearboxes that cause the trouble, is it?
Often.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you very much. Graham.
Yeah, page 38, Chair, agenda item 6.
Page 30.
38.
38, thank you.
It's 6, implication and consultations. I'd like to, if Tim could, if not Chloe, give us an understanding of when it went out to soft tender to the public domain. When the feedback come back, when the administration was, alarm bells started ringing about the additional costs and what they then did, because I understand that there was independent workshops held with a small group of administration councillors, and this is for a substantial amount of money, which would have been far greater than the workshops that we held last year. I had many exchanges with various officers about the compilation of that workshops. And I see it's just been the administration rather than councillors pro rata across the board that's been invited to participate in workshops of great importance. It's a lot of money. Then their findings were then reported to the project board on the 2nd of October 2023. And as you know, Chair, we had an overview and scrutiny meeting on the 7th of November, which was when North Hearts had their overview and scrutiny meeting discussing this. And it wasn't brought up in the forward programme here when we were discussing the forward programme for January, etc., etc. Yet, officers were aware of this actual meeting that had to take place. At North Hearts, they also said that it cannot be held back. And it went to the executive, and the executive held it back for a later date. So I'm really concerned about the time frame and us being told that it can't be held back. I'll leave it at that for the moment, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, I think probably it's appropriate for me to add into this because I myself was confused because we spent 10 or 12 minutes on the 7th of November discussing the forward plan. And there were officers in this room at the time who knew full well that this was going through North Hearts and had been for some weeks, but it was never mentioned, which I find surprising because the only reason I wasn't at the North Hearts overview and scrutiny meeting on the 7th of November was because I was required to be here, as were you. Perhaps officers would like to comment.
So first, I'd like to clarify that this is not the same report that went to North Hearts ONS. So the North Hearts ONS sought to have some opinion from ONS on elements that we wish to dialogue on. The deadline for East Hearts ONS was missed, which is why the report didn't go to East Hearts ONS. And then the decision was felt by officers that it was necessary therefore to not hear the equivalent report at North Hearts Cabinet, and therefore that's why the Cabinet report at North Hearts was held. It was intended to bring it to the East Hearts Cabinet, executive rather. So the reports were held, and that's why we've got extraordinary meetings now of ONS here at East Hearts and the equivalent in North Hearts as well.
Yeah, okay, that goes a little way to helping me, but the fact was that this was coming forward, and it may not be the same report, and I've read them both, and they're clearly not the same report, but we're talking about pretty much the same challenges across the piece. And whilst the individual elements of the service may be different, I think it's probably disingenuous to say that it's a completely different problem. The other thing that challenges me here, and I think we're getting it out of the way early, is the fact that the majority of the members of this committee were not councillors on May the 5th. They joined us on May the 6th. And therefore their experience of waste is probably that as residents rather than people who have to really give some thought to it and make decisions around it. And in fact, if we look at the extensive work that was done, but I haven't found reference to it here, back in 2022, which Clay will recognise, the extensive work that was done in trying to put together a framework for the waste and street cleansing going forward. There were only 2 of us in this room that were actually engaged in that process, and that's Graham and myself. And I have to confess that the complexity of the report and the papers that have come forward to me this evening are challenging me. And I suspect they're probably challenging Graham as well. So I'm just wondering how well equipped we are, frankly, to do this justice, given that we've not been invited to any briefings, although there have been briefings, but we've not been invited to them. Either selectively or individually. I'll just rest there and say that I am concerned, frankly, that we are not in a good position to make a decision that is going to affect every household in East Hearts.
Could I just add, Chair, that great emphasis was laid on last year about being the correct mix of councillors on that. And there was even requests that the councillors at East Hearts from a certain party were reduced from pro rata to satisfy the needs of various people at North Hearts, something I stood against. And I find now that the administration has gone ahead with North Hearts and consulted completely opposite from what we had to do. The emphasis was laid upon, and I find this, well, not a lot I can say. I think I've made my point, John.
Made. Let's see how the session develops, and we'll take it from there. I think Eric was next, Peter. Let me have Eric, and I'll bring it up.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I appreciate Tim would like to go through things sequentially, but I think we're giving some overviews at the moment. So I'll share a few thoughts on the whole thing, if I may. Clearly, the message is that inflation pressures have arisen as a result of COVID and Ukraine. And these are the same pressures the previous administration experienced on all of the capital projects and procurements. And there are external conditions outside of our control, and that's understood. I do understand the thinking around the bins. The capacity seems to work. Separating cardboard and paper from other dry recycling can extend the collection time. But I do think there are issues. The footprint needed for 4 wheelie bins and a food bin is massive. And not many households will have the space, especially terraced homes, flats, and many new build houses these days, because they just don't provide that kind of frontage. Again, while I think the capacity is there, the collection cycle could be very confusing for many. Weekly food, fortnightly green waste, 3 weekly for each of the fibre, residual and dry, but they'll never be the same because they're always in a different step. Not everyone will be able to use an app. And again, I appreciate that could be a development that helps many people. I think this must go out to consultation. As we've already heard, this is really big. It's our biggest level of expenditure. And actually, because it's so different, there's no mandate for the administration to do this. So it has to be consulted upon. And, you know, we know just listening to some of the points made at the executive earlier this week, it was all around engaging and listening. And unless we do that, I think this could go seriously wrong. There will be impacts on recycling centres at county and residual waste quantities as the changes may affect preferences for people and behaviours. It may turn out neutral. There may be some positives and negatives there. Hertfordshire County Council and the Waste Disposal Authority were not consulted. They hadn't seen this until I forwarded them a copy. And it's natural for me to do that, but given my role there. While the increased cost for various scenarios is mentioned, I can't see any reference in the report as to the yet unknown contributions from extended producer responsibility, deposit return schemes, additional burdens funding, or impact on recycling credits. I'd hate to think that actually we're going to go ahead with something and then think, well, okay, we're going to get some money later on as a bonus. That shouldn't be our thinking. We should be thinking more widely around that. Just to support the 3 weekly residual, because I responded on behalf of the Hearts Waste Partnership to DEFRA and through officers across county and from the various authorities, very much in support of at least 3 weekly residual, because DEFRA's proposal is less than that, possibly 2 weeks. What I'm hoping is that those are guidelines and actually then we've got the ability to do this properly. But because this is so different, I think it will need some kind of, well, not some, it will need consultation. And just one final thing on the street cleansing element. as James Ellis knows, I've been campaigning a bit around additional street cleansing in areas known to flood. And I think in our discussions this evening, we should take that into account, because while very much it is the case that county's role is to clean the gullies, what we often find is that there's muck in there that's come off the roads. So we cannot separate the two things, and all of the local authorities have a role in this. So I just thought I'd give that kind of overview before the further questions open up. Thanks, Chairman.
Yes, thanks for that. If you'll indulge me, a number of thoughts have occurred to me as well over time, and I'd like to support that concept about some households not having the footprint. And in particular, I don't feel that any of the things that we're doing, and we've had an opportunity now to look at it fresh again, are really catering for those of our residents who live in Edwardian, Victorian and older properties where they open straight onto the street. And there are a great number of those in our town centres. And they are having to very often lug a wheelie bin through the house to deposit it on a narrow pavement, several times a week or several times a month. And we don't seem to be doing anything to help there. And new developments, we're not encouraging centralised waste. We're still putting wheelie bins in. We shouldn't be doing that in the 21st century. We should be having more centralised waste, and that might work. It would certainly work in newer developments, but it might also work in some of the areas where we've got, take Folly Island, for example, or some of the streets in back streets in where we've got these residents who are constrained. I would have liked to have seen some more imagination, but that's a general comment. Peter.
My original question was going back to the issue that Graham raised and you commented on, and that was around the the workshops that were held with a small group of administration councillors from East Herts and North Herts. I'm just wondering how small that representation was, and actually, in the interest of transparency, it would be helpful to know who it was that represented this council that came up with the proposals.
Looking to officers to answer that. Could I just add in how they were chosen?
I think I can answer that one. For East Herts, the officers present were James Ellis, Stephen Linnett, we were joined by Chloe Hipwood, and Carl Britton and myself.
So 2 members out of 50.
2 members were.
As Graham very eloquently said earlier, that seems rather strange given the huge emphasis that was put on this 2 years ago to expand it. I mean, Chloe will recall we were in a room with 20, sometimes 25 people, and only 5 or 8 of those were officers. 15 plus, 18 plus, on some occasions 20 plus were members across the political spectrum. We seem to be, the listening council thing seems to be fading very rapidly.
I'm just wondering, Chair, where this is heading, whether we want to spend our time deliberating process or whether we want to look at the content.
Well, we do want to look at the content, but as I've already said, the content is actually quite expansive. And you've already made the point, I think, that it was decided that 2 elected members from this authority would take this process forward, whereas only 2 years ago, 18 months ago, a great many elected members were involved in this. It's challenging. We're not in the same place. This is a very, very complex thing. It affects every household. It's probably, I haven't done the figures, but it's probably the most expensive thing that we buy into.
I wonder if you can help me then, because my understanding was that this council had delegated authority to the project board to make these decisions and negotiate on the council's behalf. I don't see any deviation from that principle. Well, because the scrutiny is part of that process, but there is a difference between looking at something that has been developed than developing it, and scrutiny's role is not to develop it. Scrutiny's role is to scrutinise what's being developed.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the competence in this room at this time, given the knowledge that we have in front, the report we have in front of us, and the knowledge that we have. Graham and I and Eric are quite frankly quite knowledgeable about this, probably the most, and obviously you have become of late quite knowledgeable, but the majority in the room here today are not. Graham.
This is the biggest thing that's going to impact upon the residents within East Hearts for a good number of years. Eric mentioned consultation, yeah? And if I can remind Tim and anybody else that was at the executive on Tuesday evening, I will quote Councillor Goldsby. An accepted principle and ethos of this council is that we always listen to our residents and we always consult. We are here to serve them, and we are much more than likely to be able to do that if we know what they think and what they need. And we do need to consult with as wide a range of people as we possibly can. And I'm going to use a word here that I cut off the website, and if I get it wrong, I apologise. And not just to the small group of political nerds who look at our website regularly. We need to consult with all our residents, and goes on to say that the council will act fully upon it. Councillor Wilson talked of a change of culture and disjoint between residents and councillors. And we went out to consultation. Should we not have gone out to consultation when we did it?
You've heard from some of the old hands. I'm very keen to hear from some of the fresh minds that aren't tainted by the experience we've had over the years of disposing of waste or collecting of waste. It's Eric's job to get rid of it. Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so on the subject of listening to residents, I've been having a conversation with one of our residents who lives in a maisonette, and obviously some of the questions of the difficulties of disposing with recycling have come up for this resident. He obviously can't carry the big boxes which for recycling paper which he was issued with as part of the previous, administration's sort of way of doing things. And I think perhaps that's something that could be looked at as, for example, having bags instead of boxes. Another decision that was taken under the previous administration was the removal of the public recycling bins. So this particular resident, for example, used to very public spiritedly take his recycled paper for recycling over to the public recycling bins. But then in May, as a result of the decision in October, those, without a lot of notice, those bins were removed, and perhaps there was a good reason for those bins being removed, but it makes that it makes it more difficult for people who don't have room for recycling bins in their own properties to dispose of that waste, and so that I think that perhaps needs to be reviewed. I think, Chair, you mentioned the need for more communal recycling methods and more communal bins, and perhaps again, particularly for maisonettes and flats, that's something that needs to be looked at, because recycling has been going on for a long time in East Hearts, but we still don't seem to, under the previous administration, to have resolved the problem with recycling in flats. So that some flats do have recycling facilities, but it does seem to be not the case that every single block of flats has appropriate facilities. So it depends. It seems to depend a bit on what space is available and whether the management committee thinks it's appropriate and those sorts of things. So I think we could definitely encourage more communal recycling. So yes, I do have a point about the drains, but I'll come back to that later, if that's okay.
It's to be able to help us with that one, because I alluded to the fact that we do have challenging properties, and that's another example, and we've all lived with that at some stage.
Indeed, and you know, Eric made the point about the footprint of the overall footprint of waste recycling, or rather recycling and waste, and that's true. You know, it's very hard to make sure that we can, one, maximize recycling, the quality of our recycling, falling short of commingling. If we commingle, the value drops right out of it, and in some instances we actually end up paying for the stuff to be recycled, which is a nonsense. So the purest, the most practical, we hope, or we can make it practical, is to have separate bins for recycling. There are facilities, as you mentioned, Rachel, for communal properties to elect for recycling bins and communal recycling bins. A lot of it depends on the success of that. Depends on the sort of willingness of the occupants to actually go along with that and actually use them appropriately. So we can provide them, and that's it's not new under this contract. They can be provided, but it does mean that there will be an onus on and a responsibility placed on those residents to be able to use them properly.
Can I just come back on this question of paper, because I share Rachel's experience. I've had a number of people say to me that they regret the removal of the centralised bins, and I point out to them, but we've been collecting paper from your doorstep for the last 15, 20 years. So why do you feel the need? And you've explained and expanded on why that sometimes is the case. But typically, the amount of paper we get nowadays is reducing dramatically. We don't get telephone books anymore. We don't get thick catalogues. We don't get newspapers on a daily basis. So, you know, are we not in a position to look at that and think of something new and interesting way of doing it?
It's a good challenge, Chair, in that you're absolutely right, and most of us around the forum here will have experienced a drop off. We don't buy newspapers as often as we used to do. We tend to rely on online. However, this the bin for fibre is particularly paper and cardboard, and I bet everybody in this room this week will have had something through the post in cardboard through the arrival to the high street, and it will go on and presumably will increase on that basis. So whilst paper may drop off, I think probably cardboard will increase, and certainly the bulk of the waste that we collect is cardboard, and it's equally valuable. It's a very valuable resource that we need to collect. Yeah,
but people in flats and masonries have a particular problem in that they're not allowed to keep stuff in the corridors or on the landings. If they've got a paper box, if it's down with the main bins, it's problematic because it's raided or it blows away or whatever. There are challenges there. I'm going to come back to you, Rachel. I'm going to go to David, and then I'm going to go to Sue.
Thank you. Question for clarification, if I may. The new residual waste bins, obviously smaller than the existing, I believe. Have we done any analysis on whether they're going to be big enough?
The shortest answer is yes. So yeah, when we were exploring our service design options back in 2022 with the cross-party workshops, we did explore this particular model. We did look at the capacity of residual waste bins, and we also considered the outcome of the public consultation, which identified that you know, most residents were you know, actually finding their recycling bins full rather than their residual waste bins full. The other thing that we are aware of is that with changes to packaging waste, which are going to come about as a result of the extended producer responsibility schemes, packaging will become much more recyclable. So we are expecting the amount that needs to be disposed of in residual waste to continue to reduce. There will always be an element of residual waste, and we accept that. But as you will know, that our partners in North Herts have been operating with 180 litre wheeled bins now since 2013, I believe it was, without any issue. And residents during the public consultation were quite clear that the bin capacity was sufficient. So if I refer members to 3.33 of the report, it identifies that 48% of the North Herts residents and 85% of the East Herts residents felt that their recycling bin was full or overflowing, and identifies that, you know, we do need more space in the recycling bin rather than the residual waste bin. The previous report in October of last year, I haven't got the stats in front of me, also identified how many residents were telling us that their residual waste bin was half full or less. It was about 50%, I think, but I don't have that figure in front of me. But yes, we've used the information in our public consultation to inform our decisions, along with evidence that we've seen from other local authorities already operating these collection models. We've looked at the current waste composition that we have in both East Herts and North Herts to consider that. So there was a compositional analysis completed in 2021, which we've used to inform that. And as I said, we've had a look across the industry at what is demonstrating both financially sustainable and environmentally sustainable solutions, which we can bring forward when, you know, the councils are pressured financially, but also we want to drive for that improved performance. And this is an opportunity for us to do that.
Can I just add to that, Chairman? Yeah, you know, it's just that Chloe mentioned the compositional analysis, and at county through disposal, we've found that, I think it varies a bit, but around 20% of what's in the residual waste is food. A lot of it, not just food waste, but wasted food that could otherwise be used. So having an alternative, which is the food waste bin, and campaigns to get people to use the food they buy and not waste food, should actually leave enough capacity, which is why I'm supportive of this 3 weekly residual waste.
Just, yeah, if I may, two quick follow-ups. Relying on what residents have told us about the capacity in their bins is not necessarily the right way forward, when their bins will be collected 1 week less frequently. So the total amount of capacity of their bins is being reduced quite significantly, A, by a smaller bin, and B, by the fact we're collecting it less frequently. The other follow-up, if you could just clarify what's going to happen to the old bins.
So the idea of buying the smaller residual bin is to reduce the cost of providing a new bin to households. So the other bin will become part of the suite that we're using. So we're going to have a dry recycling bin for cans, plastic, including plastic film, glass and cartons. It's probably something I've forgotten. And then the other bin will be for cardboard and paper. And you will also note, just to come back to the point around masonettes and assisted collections, that in 3.30 of this report, we identify that we are looking at options to allow residents to have an opt-in where they live in a terraced property, so that they can continue to use their box service if they don't feel they need the capacity of a bin, but can choose to also have a bin if they want that extra capacity.
Thank you, Sue.
A resident contacted us, local ward councillors, soon after being elected, because he was so fed up of his paper bin going missing 5 or 6 times, and lots of the time on social media that's commented that it goes back in the back of the lorry, it gets broken, and comment how frustrating that is. This resident was so fed up with this, he did an FOI on the cost of replacing those bins. And he came back with a figure of 2022-23, £39,087 was spent on replacing 6,450 bins. So I'm wondering, going to the larger bin size for paper and cardboard, they're more resilient, that there'll be a cost saving in some way from the waste that's happening now. I just thought it's worth.
So you go to a larger size bin for paper and cardboard, but we're already hearing that people are struggling to carry the bin that's already there.
Yeah, but I'm saying there'll be less wastage in money terms of replacing those smaller bins. I thought it's worth pointing out.
Yeah, well, my experience has always been you need to throw a couple of bricks in the bottom of the thing anyway, because otherwise it blows away when it's not when it's only partially full. I've got you, George, but I'm going to go to Calvin now.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I wanted to some clarification, really. I think a couple of things. One was to pick up on this issue of bins, because I think where there'll be a lot of changes. The bins will be for different things, which could be confusing for residents. But I wanted to check what was the plan at present, because if I'm right, the report says that the existing residual bin will become the bin for the fibre, for the paper and the card. But what is there a plan to change that now? Because that's a new type of bin, as I understand it. So what is the plan at the present time? Were those bins going to continue to be used at the larger amount for residual, or were those bins going to become surplus because you were introducing a new bin for residual that was smaller?
So yeah, we had not intended to spend the capital to replace the existing 240-litre bins out there, because of course replacing a perfectly functioning bin, isn't sensible. But what we did agree at the last meeting in October on waste was that replacement bins would all be replaced with 180-litre size. So so anybody getting new bins or new properties, they have 180-litre bins rather than 240-litre.
Okay, thank you. That sort of clarifies that there will be an additional capital cost in providing a complete set of bins now, rather than progressively over a period of time. So I just wanted to clarify that. The other question that I wanted to clarify, that sort of builds on that, is the figures that we have in the appendix, without referring directly to them. Do those figures that we have in the appendix include the projected savings or additional amounts that we would be getting from recycling? Because I think there are sort of two sets of figures, and I wanted to know whether one set of figures was included in the other one, or whether it was in addition to.
The report identifies an operational saving, potential operational saving in part 2, and then in the next column it gives some additional information about other contract impacts, and they are separate. So any contract impacts that are commented in the column next to it are separate additional impacts financially.
I think I've got a very simple one. I think you point out, that we may not all understand this, and I think I get most of it, but just in very simple terms. I live in some flats, communal flats. Every now and then I go down, dump some cardboard and aluminum cans or whatever in the recycling. Occasionally I might throw some paper in the paper bin, and then I have my general bins. How does my life change? What do I change my routine in any way?
No change, George.
Don't think so. Pretty sure. There's nothing in here that's overtly controversial other than the financial elements of things.
The extra is in food separation, and as Eric was saying, that's 20% of waste, which is extraordinary. Not only in the fact that it's been grown and bought and then thrown away, but just the fact that it's taking up landfill, storage, whatever, and we can actually generate, there's a positive side that we can actually generate a good out of that. Instead of it rotting to methane, we can actually use that methane in a controlled environment and produce power. So there is, I think that's the significant difference.
So I don't currently have a food waste bin anywhere.
Absolutely, nobody has it.
Yeah, so I will get one of those, and that will be an improvement to my general carbon footprint.
You won't look back, Josh.
The doors are quite good as well. Could I just ask for some explanation around a little bit around the we've got a target date of May 2025, but the report acknowledges that there are uncertainties, given we don't quite know as yet, or at least when this report was written, where we're going to be with the government's diktats on this subject. All sorts of deadlines come and go, especially in local government, and contracts can be extended for 6 months, a year, 18 months, or whatever to accommodate that. Given there's some uncertainties in the situation generally, and we must have a degree of uncertainty about how well this is going to go down with the residents. And Chloe will be more than conscious of what happened last time there was a change at North Hearts. Why do we not have time to take a step back and reflect and look at this more carefully?
So our existing contractor has made it clear that they're not willing to extend the contract with us on the existing payment terms.
Yes, so I just to reiterate actually a point that I was making about the maisonettes and the flats. Is there a possibility of changing that blue bin to a blue box option to a bag? Because you can't really expect people to carry blue boxes downstairs. It's dangerous. And there's not necessarily a place to keep that waste in the flat, and that's also, you know, true in other circumstances. But that I would recommend we trial that.
Just in response to that, the client are quite happy to take that away and have a look. We have considered sacks historically. There's pros and cons, obviously, to utilising sacks. But what I would just remind members is that we do offer assisted waste collection services. So if a resident is unable to manage their bins or boxes, they can apply for assisted collections and be supported in that by collection staff.
Thank you. No, that's helpful. But given that there's not the space to store the box or the and the difficulty in taking it downstairs, I think another option is worth considering.
Thank you, Chair. Afraid I have a number of points, Tim, so bear with me here. The first one is I do agree with Graham that I think it's disappointing that there hasn't been greater consultation here. I can give you some of my opinions, and I will do so. But largely those are just my opinions as someone who lives in a terraced house, and as Councillor Nichols, Councillor Carter said, there are people in different situations whose input would be really valuable, and I'm sure you and Councillor Burton did your best to represent views, but you won't have the opinions of everyone, and so it feels like a bit of a missed opportunity here. Maybe not for a full consultation, but some sort of mini citizens assembly, or that there was a whole number of options to solicit that input far more widely than I think has been done, because this is a large change, and whilst Councillor Williams' life may not change very much, for some residents it will, and I think it's important that we're hearing those voices, and that's slightly disappointing that it hasn't happened so far. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth just clarifying what the role that Councillor Britton and myself undertook. We, at the request of the project board, were a sounding board for some options which had come up live within the tender debate. And these were a refined set of options which they wanted sense checking, hence the attendance of James and Stephen, because they wanted some financial qualification as well. And that's what we did. So the shape of the contract hasn't changed since the original consultation. What's changed is some of the way that this has been described in the tender document, and the way that that has been interpreted within the tender document, and how that's led to pricing, which has stressed the financial sort of envelope. So that was our role. We weren't there to represent anybody's views. We weren't there to represent residents. We weren't there even to represent our ward members. We were there as a sounding board for clarity within the contract itself, and that's the role we fulfilled.
That's helpful, I think, is perhaps more of a gap then, because whilst it might be relatively small in terms of contract, I think the effect of some of these could be quite large. So coming to perhaps my personal opinions here, and a lot of this is just is somewhat subjective. There is option E, which is talking about removal of waste bins, 30% of the bins being removed there. Personally, that feels to me quite a large impact compared to some of the service level agreements changes for perhaps a smaller impact there. And so that would be something I would be far less comfortable seeing than, for example, some of the SLA changes. But again, that is just my opinion, and other residents might have different opinions, which would be good to reflect. So that would be my main point there. 2 further points, if I may, Chair. Yeah, I've got a nod. It wasn't clear to me who's making the final decision on whether the contract is acceptable. We're making a really large change to residents' lives here, and is this something that is being delegated to officers once the executive has agreed the general shape of the contract, or is the final contract going to come before the executive to be signed up and say, you know, yes, we are happy with this or not?
So the report that will go to executive later on, well, next month now, will be for a decision. So it will be executive that makes the decision.
So that's next month. There will be kind of a preferred bidder will have been selected that fulfills all the requirements, and the executive saying yes, or is that saying we want the tender to look like this shape, and whoever matches everything will be selected?
Yeah, so it's necessary for us to take forward a final specification. So the purpose, obviously, of dialogue is to tweak the specification to get that best financial and environmentally sustainable position that we are so looking for. So this gives us that opportunity to do that, hence the dialoguing with bidders. We then, as a council, or councils, because we work with North Herts, need to get a final position to put forward to bidders so that they've got that clear position to bid against. The problem, obviously, if we're not clear, is that they will potentially include risk pricing, you know, linked to any number of issues that we identify as if buts or maybes. Hence why there's this clear 30% of litter bins, because that was indicated to us during dialogue that was enough of a number to mean it impacted on resource levels, which means therefore you could get a saving.
But so, for example, if a bid came in saying, you know, we can hit points A, B, and C, but not D, and another bid came in to say B, C, and D, but not A, that's a decision that's ultimately made by officers, or is that a decision that's made by?
In terms of how the contract is evaluated, that is, you know, against a set framework, both price, quality, etc. So it boils down to the final price for the price elements. The quality elements, they have to fulfill the requirements of the specification.
Okay.
So yeah, once we've set that, they have to deliver that. So it's just then, you know, the quality of that delivery that we're assessing, as well as the price that they're putting forward for that delivery.
Do we
If I could just add as well, from sort of a purely legal perspective of how procurement works, as Chloe was saying there, in your example where bidder A says they can do A, B, and C, but not D and E, and someone else says they can do D and E and A, B, and C, or whatever it is, the whole point of the scoring system is that it becomes impartial. So there's no kind of preference being placed from a human perspective. It's done analytically. So from the quality markings that you would attribute to each of those, it then produces an overall number, and then the winner is obviously dictated through mathematics, basically.
I suppose my question then would be who's deciding the scoring system?
So the scoring system has been developed in consultation with Eunomia, our consultants, and also our legal representatives, Sharp Pritchard. That has also had oversight from Project Board.
Thank you. Can I just as an aside, do we anticipate the current contractor will be a bidder?
I'm unable to comment on that at this stage. Yeah.
Right, I've got a number here. I'm going to go to Sue first.
Obviously, a big part of this is behaviour change, and we can't keep producing as much rubbish as we are now. It's too expensive, and it's having a massive effect on the environment. Is there a budget in place for marketing and education around the change, because that's going to be instrumental in its success? And also the 30% reduction in litter bins. We've got very keen litter pickers in Buntingford where I live. I don't think that's going to be a real issue. We've got people taking control over litter in certain areas, a community awareness of littering and being responsible for collecting it. I think that can drive behaviour change as well. So I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sue. Peter.
Yeah.
Answer on the marketing, please.
Maybe it's worth it saying back in October 22, there was an agreement that there would be an appointee within each of North Herts and East Herts to act as a coordinator, and I forget the exact title, but something like a waste coordinator, who will be working with interested parties and encouraging waste. And encouraging waste, that'll be extraordinary. Encouraging recycling and making sure that we manage our waste effectively. Well, the actual date for appointments is sometime next year, so we're well within schedule.
I've got a few comments on three of the items, D, E, and K. I'll start with E because Sue's just raised the issue about 30% of litter bins from predominantly outside of town centres. So I guess I have a question about why we think town centres have a priority over villages, for instance, and why should that behaviour be different in towns than it is in villages? So just a question there that I think we need to think about. The other thing I think there is that this is not a one-size-fits-all scenario. So I've had parishes who have no litter bins whatsoever in their parish, and their view is that they don't want them, people take their litter home. That doesn't work everywhere. And we also have parish councils who own litter bins, who East Herts charges to collect that waste. So there's some conversations to be had here with parish councils, because whatever changes you're going to make, you're going to have those parish councils on side and work with them, and don't assume that you can automatically remove 30% of litter bins from every village in East Herts. It won't work like that. James has been involved in some conversations recently around what's happened in Stansted Abbots, for instance, with the boat residents and the increase in litter from scenarios like that. And there are other examples around the district that would come under the same with the same issue. So I think there just needs to be some. For the devil is always in the detail, and the detail isn't here particularly. D.
I would draw your attention to there is some science behind, or there will be some science applied that. If you look at 318, we will use guidance from RAP's infrastructure report and target where we know when we've got intelligence on bins never being used, and clearly, and in fact, the example you mentioned in Stansted Abbots, we actually did remove one of the bins at the request of the residents on there. So it's not an unprecedented move, but it does need doing with thoughtfully. I agree.
But that's the point. It's not a one size fits all, and there is a huge issue about public behaviour. I pick up litter on my drive every day of the week, sandwich packs, things that people are chucking out of car windows as they go by. That is a real issue, and that's why we also spend significant amounts of money litter picking at the side of dual carriageways, because people are doing exactly the same there. They're chucking their litter out of their car windows and van windows. Removal of continuous street cleansing presence in town centres and back to standard by at 9 a.m. And further down, I think it was on page 31, it makes a comment about there are some risks of residents noticing a little more litter on their way to work. having held responsibility for licensing in the last administration, I remember spending the early hours of the morning during the weekend trailing the streets with the police in Hertford. And those town centres are an absolute hideous mess first thing in the morning. And my question would be, what engagement have you had with high street businesses around this? Because those high street businesses are going to be opening their doors to the public at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. They want some assurance that they're going to get customers coming through that at that time in the morning. So just we need to think carefully about the impact that has on others. Not just, so this is not only just about residents.
Could I just add to that, if you wouldn't mind, the cost of clearing up after the nighttime economy? Can we look at recovering it? We've had some events here in Hertford that have cost thousands of pounds each night to clear up, but we've never apparently sought to recharge any of the organisations that have made it. Now, the polluter must pay. So, you know, what options are there to recharge through the nighttime economy, which is a predominant feature?
I can answer sort of initially on the continuous presence. Now, I can't answer specific details around, you know, bidders' proposals, unless you want to move to part 2. So I can talk about that a little bit in part 2. But what I would say is the standards in the contract have not changed around street cleansing. We are still requiring bidders to maintain a standard. Now, the back to standard by 9 AM basically means that instead of it being pristine at 8 AM, it's pristine by 9 AM. That's the difference. And it just allows bidders to move resources around a bit more easily in those first few hours, because otherwise, obviously, the amount of resource they need to make sure that every town centre across East and North Herts is back to standard by 8 AM is significant. Whereas, of course, if you extend that by an hour, it gives them a little bit more flexibility to move staff around and get that done with reduced resources. So that's what that best to stand is about. But so I can't really talk too much about bidder proposals.
But I do think there is a conversation to be had with high street businesses, because that could that could be quite a difficult situation. Although back to standard condition by 9 AM is fine, but actually those staff that are going to those businesses are going in long before 9 o'clock. My third comment was around item K, which is to reduce the number of items collected as part of bulky waste services from 6 to 3. And I'm interested in the science behind this, because by reducing the bulky waste services from 6 to 3, does that not possibly present us with a fly tipping issue? Because if people are paying to have bulky waste collected, there'll be people that are not willing to pay twice. And how much does this council pay to recover fly tipping? How much will it save on reducing this from 6 to 3, and the implication that that has on fly tipping?
So in relation to the bulky waste point, essentially the reason that there are resource savings are because every time a bulky waste collection is booked, the contractor has to consider that there might be 6 sofas on that truck, which requires obviously considerable space and therefore increases the tipping you know, ability of that truck to go backwards and forwards. So reducing it to 3 means that they can fit more on a vehicle, you know, for collections. We've also looked at the data around our collections, and the majority of residents are using 3 or fewer items for their collections at the moment. In terms of, because the other thing that we have had is a change in legislation or guidance which came in January, which required soft furnishings, sort of waste household soft furnishings, to be collected separately from non-soft furnishings due to the presence of persistent organic pollutants. So again, this means that actually now residents do have to book two separate. If they've got, say, a bedside table and a sofa, that has to be two separate collections because we're unable to collect them together on the same vehicle. It's extremely frustrating for us and our contractor, but that's the way we've been required to undertake collections. That's sort of what presents us with those savings in relation to bulky waste, is the ability to essentially get more collections on a truck and therefore reduce the tipping times.
I do think we need to be very careful about the implication of flight as a result of that change. And actually a sofa is not a sofa, is not a sofa. You've been to DFS in recent years. You can have a sofa that's half the size of half the width of this council chamber, or you can have a two-seater sofa or a much tighter, smaller thing. There is something potentially about asking the questions when they're booked about the size of the items that are being collected, surely, that would inform the person collecting of what sort of size vehicle that will require, surely.
Chair, if I could just. Yeah, just specifically on the fly tipping point. In my previous work, I was a litigation solicitor and I've prosecuted many a fly tipper, and that there is an opportunity in that setting to reclaim costs from guilty parties. So traditionally, you obviously ask for your legal fees and all that. I mean, as we're talking about the cost caused by fly tipping, then it is open to the council when we prosecute to calculate what costs there are and put that to the court and see whether or not that can be recouped.
Well, I can comment on that, and that is that we might be able to do that in certain instances for the one that we catch them for, but not the 10 that we didn't catch them for.
No, I asked a similar question of the Hearts Waste Partnership officer, and it's very rare that we actually do that. We are able to do it, but it really doesn't happen very much. There's also a consultation going on at the moment with the Sentencing Council and our approach is to ask for the sentencing to be at least as much as a fixed penalty notice, because what tends to happen is that people go to court, say they haven't got any money, and then the penalty is reduced. So we're actually looking to really increase those penalties and have much more consistency. But I take the point James makes, but it rarely happens.
In 16 years that I've been interested in fly tipping, I think we've crushed one vehicle, but it's happening every week. But thank you, James.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
I think it bears bearing in mind as well. There is a difference between fines and costs as well. So the costs, I think you're referring to fines there, Councillor Buckmaster, where they're the same as the amount of fixed penalty notices, but costs are separate. And I take what you mean, that we don't often ask for the cost of the recovery of the fly tip. Often that's because it's quite difficult to calculate what that is, but it is available to us. I don't want to spend any more time on litigation.
Graham.
Yeah, fly tipping's far more complex than what's been alluded to. First of all, we need resource to go out to the fly tipping, and for that actually to be identified. And once we've identified the individual or individuals who's done that fly tipping, there's a long process to actually take it to court. Currently, he starts as an officer who does that, but if the fly tipping was to increase, we need to ensure that we have a resource in place, and that resource has got the backup to actually, because it's not just one individual, that individual needs other people round about them to actually bring this to court.
I'd get your point, Graham, but this is we're kind of going out with.
Well, it's cost.
Indeed, I think we're all
Cost.
recognizant of that.
Yeah. So if I can, Tim, if I can maybe move on. I think in the document it mentions about reducing the road sweeping. Is that correct? Yeah. Today I had a meeting with my one of my parish councils, Little Haddon Parish Council, with the clerk, the chair of the council, and an officer from county. And we talked about the A120 bypass, the flood alleviation scheme, and how they have challenges with water levels on the road. And one of the things that came out was, and as Eric alluded to earlier, was if the roads were swept more often, we would not have as many drainage problems as we currently do, because a lot of the problems are leaves, the dead trees, etc., going into the drains, blocking the drains, and whatever. And Eric mentioned about the collection of the waste and had you actually consulted the council, Hertfordshire County Council, on the impact of that? Have you actually contacted Hertfordshire County Council to understand what the impact of cutting back on the road sweeping means for them to go out and work on the roads that get flooded through the gullies, etc.?
Well, maybe if I can, I'll take part of that, and Chloe will take the other part, hopefully. So within the existing contract, there is no, and as you'll have read the document, there isn't a formal requirement within the contract to collect fallen leaves. That was disbanded years ago. Within this contract, there is provision, however, to do flood alleviation, to do emergency measures. And Eric, I know you've been personally involved in one. Peter, I know you've been involved in one down in Stansted Abbott. And these are the local hotspots or wet spots that we will need to identify. And there's provision within the contract for those particular places to be policed regularly, and with a view of preventing flooding. So that's an additional measure within this contract. I'll leave Chloe to comment on the consultation and the frequency of road sweeping.
Just to clarify, there's no reduction in sweeping in this report. There is no recommendation to reduce sweeping in this report. As I've already mentioned, the standards required by this contract are not changing. There is still a requirement for the contractor to maintain levels in exactly the same way as they are to maintain them in the existing contract. So in relation to sweeping, I can only assume you are referring to Leaf 4, which does relate to the North Herts side of the contract.
No, detritus.
As I said, the report does not say that there will be a reduction in sweeping.
So with regards to the hotspot, County Council will be fully aware of all the hotspots round about the BSATS district and county. Has any approach been made to them to establish the hotspots?
Well, I guess as the contract's got until May 2025, then we've got plenty of time to indulge in that conversation, Graham.
Just one last one. I'm sort of curious, Tim. Back to number 6. Mentioned it was independent, the workshops, and I think you mentioned it was you. Yeah. Are you and Carol Britton both on the board?
No, neither of us are on the board. Well, I'm certainly not on the board.
So what part do you sit on?
I'm an executive member for environmental sustainability.
This is the West Board,
looking
North
after waste.
and East Herts. Who sits on the board?
On the project board?
No, the actual Joint Waste Contract Board.
Oh, that is myself. There you go. Sorry, I'm getting lost in the terminology.
No.
You could have told me it was me.
I didn't want to.
Save a lot of time.
The question is Carol also, because he's a financial.
Yes, I think, Carol attends those meetings as well.
The the portfolio holder for finance has been requested to attend project board meetings, both from East Herts and New Herts, because of the affordability issues that we've been experiencing in the contract. So they have been attending.
Yeah, it's just that here it says independent workshops, but the members of these workshops were members of the project, well, board or whatever, and you reported to the project board. Yeah, anyway, I'll leave it.
Okay, good. So
Thank you. The problem of town centre littering, isn't it an offence to litter as a person? I'm just wondering what the role of fines could be in recouping some of the costs of clearing up the litter, and whether they are an effective use. Again, we have CCTV in town centres, you could identify.
Yeah, I mean, again, whatever success we've enjoyed today will probably extend into the future unless there are some unknown resources that we can draw on to heighten that surveillance. I mean, I think it was Peter mentioned that, you know, a lot of, I do a regular litter pick, and a lot of the stuff we pick, in fact, the most of the stuff we pick up has been thrown out of car windows or vehicles driving past, the vast majority of it. And nobody's ever there to capture that. Now that might be different in town centres, but it's almost certainly takeaway packaging which is dropped in each instance.
Well, certainly in my experience at night time, that could be anything. And I think that law enforcement agencies are busy with more important subjects than catching people. So you've got people urinating, vomiting, bags of chips, beer cans, bottles, you name it. It's all, that is all litter. And I'm not sure that there is something about needing to change people's behaviour. How you start to do that is not an overnight thing, and it's not going to happen in this administration's 4 years.
No, it's making it socially unacceptable, like smoking is, isn't it? Basically, yeah.
thank you. Calvin.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're talking about litter, so I just wanted to go back to, I think, the points that Councillor Boylan was making with regard to the proposed reduction in litter bins, the 30% reduction in litter bins. And I would really want to emphasise the points that were made about it not being one size fits all. In my experience, there are litter bins which are regularly overflowing. There are litter bins which are regularly not used a lot. And I think it would be much better if there was a review of where the litter bins were generally, rather than setting a target of reducing it by 30%, given that reduction might then require more street cleaning. I think the other thing that I would emphasise is that engagement with towns and parishes, because some of them, and Bishop's Orford is one of those, that does provide bins and that sort of thing. So whereas there are others where that they don't have any at all. So I think that they need to be engaged with before you make any progress with that.
I'll take your point, Calvin, and I agree. The 30% is an arbitrary number, but it's an arbitrary number which is, as Chloe says, is of a scale which is significant enough to shift the dial in terms of costs. Now, where those will be, Peter suggests, and you've reinforced, there needs to be some thinking about that, how that happens. And you're absolutely right. There are some which are never used, and there are some which, you know, through circumstance are overused. There's also experiential evidence that taking away a bin actually encourages people to take stuff home in some instances, and that will depend on where it happens, obviously. So there's a lot going for it, but it does need careful application. And I'll take your point about the consultation and discussion with towns and parishes.
Rachel's been a model in patience, but before I come to her, could I just, while we're on litter, if you forgive me, where are we with dog feces? I mean, are they on a pure recharge basis, or is that part of our? So I know a lot of them are town and parish council funded.
Yeah, I mean, that's separate to this and is dealt with by parks. So, yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, this is I apologise if this is in the paper somewhere, but when's the contract due to start and when is it due to end? How long is it how long is the contract due to last for? Because this is obviously a developing area, as they always are. But I'm not clear how long the contract is for.
I can, I'm sure Chloe will give more detail, but it starts in May 2025 and it's 8 plus 8. So it's a potential to run for 16, but it's an 8.
Sorry, 16 years.
Well, it's an 8-year contract,
8-year
but there is a mutual agreement, or within there is mutual agreement that could extend.
So we could, I mean, there's a lot of suggestions, a lot of, and as we're saying, this is a developing area. So I suppose what I'm interested in knowing is, will there be some work done on some of the things which might not go into this contract, but might be suitable for a contract in 8 years' time? I mean, we should be planning ahead. I think that's my feeling.
Yeah, and we already know that there are gaps within the government waste and recycling consultation. So we're expecting to be able to be around tables, no doubt, looking at in mid-2024 to make sure we're in good shape. And there will be further changes as the contract develops. There are change mechanisms within any contract. What we're trying to do here is to make sure when we set off in May 2025, we've got as much of it covered as we can, and that it's financially sustainable. It's not something we can't afford to do. It's not something that won't run the distance. It has to be financially viable from the outset, but it also has to meet the regulatory requirements, some of which we know there are gaps in at the moment, and there will be more stuff coming down the line. Chloe mentioned the extended producer elements which are going to come in, which will have a significant impact. It will produce closer scrutiny from people like supermarkets who are going to have to pay for some of that waste recovery. So they will be anxious to make sure we've got effective and cost-efficient methods in place to be able to do that. So there will be change within that period for sure.
Can I mention the break clause words? Where are the break clauses? More difficult when we're tied in with North Arleside Grant, but
It's 8 years is the break clause.
Nothing before then. Right, looking around, none.
Just touching on contract changes and timelines. One of the changes here is that we need to buy a significant number of new bins for this. And at the same time, you touched on some of the government guidance, which is, when I read it, was suggesting that separation of waste was being discouraged there, and I appreciate that there's uncertainty around that. Could you talk a little bit about what the timelines are for us to make a very large capital expenditure that may then turn out, if the government decide one way, to be something that we can't do, versus potentially holding off a bit?
So just to be clear, the government are not saying we can't separate waste. What they are actually saying is, the legislation as it currently stands actually requires us to separate waste unless it is technically, economically, environmentally, not technically, environmentally, and economically practicable. Sorry, that was a long-winded way of saying it. So the requirement currently is to separate waste. So when we did the original service designs back for this current contract, we decided that the evidence stacked up for commingling a certain proportion of our waste, but that actually keeping paper separate was the most financially and environmentally right thing to do at the time. The government are reducing those requirements. They are basically saying we can now commingled, which is advantageous for lots of districts and boroughs. But ultimately, each local council needs to be in a position to make its own decisions which are best for its residents. And this proposal that we're putting forward, we think works in our particular demographic, with our sort of rurality plus urban elements of the district. So that's why we've come forward with this kind of model, because we think that this is going to drive good recycling behaviours from our residents because of the demographic, and therefore see us in good stead going forwards for any future changes. In terms of the resource and waste strategy, we're not expecting major changes. So essentially, if if the government guidance doesn't restrict, shall we say, anything that we've put in our contract, we will continue forward on this specification. We will come back to members, however, if when the guidance is published, there is a restriction. And that specifically relates to the residual waste frequency. So already we have agreed that we will move forward with 3 weekly residual waste collections. But of course, it is only prudent that officers build in a backstop, as it were, to deal with the eventuality that the government decide that residual waste frequency has to be more frequent than that. Of course, we don't want to do that. So then we would come back to members and have a discussion about the position going forwards. Obviously, as you will all be aware, the costs are significant if we retain a fortnightly residual waste collection. So none of our proposals have that in mind.
Is the same true then with the big, because I think you're referring to the DEFRA guidance that came out. And I think that talked about the government saying going back to 2 weeks potentially, but did also talk about having to reduce the number of bins. And I take your point about the cost about the 2 weeks, but my question is, are we about to spend significant amounts of money only to, and I appreciate this isn't coming from you, and we can have my opinions about what the government is doing here, and the clarity would be wonderful. But are we about to spend a lot of money for the government to change its mind?
No, there is no indication that the government is going to prevent the separate collection of recycling. Absolutely none.
Thank you.
I would have thought moving the food element from residual waste is a big move, and that will be a very positive one, because that there's the pest and disease element of mixing it with residual waste, and you're taking that away, so you're likely to able to have a longer time span for collecting the residual waste on its own, I think.
Yeah, it's just worth remembering that the resource and waste consultation and strategy has gone on for a long time. It was very late, and a lot of us were pushing for an idea of what the guidance was, which is why we engaged with DEFRA. And just to answer the question, the important thing is that it's a core set of recyclables. Basically, the guidance now is saying it's up to the local authorities how they collect it. The other key thing is the weekly food waste, and there's an implication that residual waste ought to be 2 weekly. But again, the feeling is, and the lobbying that we're doing is around, it ought to be guidance, and there ought to be the flexibility, which should give some level of safeguard. Thanks, Chairman.
It's worth saying that, Eric, in support of that, you as chair have driven a composite reply from Hertfordshire County, from Hertfordshire councils, district councils, which says exactly that, which is for the freedom to be able to decide, the operational flexibility to be able to decide that 3 weeks is suitable for us.
Thank you. Could I just quick financial one? I've got to mention that in 331 we're sharing an officer with North Herts, and it mentions it's an 8k cost to us at 331, but I don't find it in 331, and I can't find it anywhere else. It's not in and of itself a huge amount of money, but it'd be nice to know.
Apologies, that must be my referencing. Bear with me. It's actually, yeah, apologies. It's mentioned in the finance section. So bear with me. Yeah, I'm just trying to find where I did actually mention the office. Apologies.
While Chloe's doing that, I think looking around, I'm not seeing any more indications that people would like to ask questions. The financials are in part 2. We haven't done very much with that. Is there an appetite to do that? My feeling is with scrutiny, wherever possible, we should avoid part 2. And unless anybody's got any particular queries around the financials at this stage, I suggest we don't go there. Chloe.
Apologies, yes. So it's 3.34 that reference should be rather than 3.31. Yeah.
Got one more because I'm very selfish in my questioning. Basically, with the sort of 30% reduction, if I have, for example, 70 bins in my ward, which I don't, and I decide that there's another one that needs to be built on, let's say, Star Street, theoretically, and I think, well, obviously we need to collect it, so we can build it as a town council, but it needs to be collected by East Herts. Do I have to remove the collection? Do we have to remove the collections from another bin? Do we sacrifice a bin in order to get a new one, essentially?
So in terms of managing growth, obviously the contract does deal with growth. So where we're talking about new developments which have new road infrastructures, we will be reviewing those road infrastructures to determine whether or not new litter bins are required in those. In terms of you know, whether or not you've got 70 in the district, we will find that the contract is slightly fluid and it is going to be needs based. And I think that's the key point to raise here. You know, we as officers want bins in the right place, and we also want you know, that engagement with local members who do know their areas to make sure we've got them in the right place. So it's not about, you know, we make the 30%, that's it for the next 16 years. There will be some level of growth, but of course it is about balancing that resource levels and making sure we can actually service those effectively.
Going to go to James first. I'll come back to you, Eric.
I just wanted to draw members' attention as well to paragraph 3.14 in the report, where we make reference to some proposed medium intensity changes to the service level agreement not being in line with COPLA. We've discussed earlier about government guidance around the residual waste, and I think again these are more guidance around the levels of cleanliness of streets. You will see in the supplemental agenda that was circulated that there are paragraphs there to put members' minds at ease around what that involves. So deviating from COPLA does mean that you know, it is open for you know, for someone to complain that the street isn't to a level that it should be because it isn't in line with those regulations. And in those situations, if they wanted to issue us with a notice, then they could possibly do that. However, we have sought additional advice on that from our legal representatives at Sharp Richard, and they've told us that it's not to a point where it would be considered as deviating from the law. It's deviating from guidance. So I just wanted to draw attention to that so members are aware of it. As I say, a fuller explanation is contained in the supplemental agenda if members wanted to take the time to read that as well. But I thought it was worth drawing attention to that so members know that it's there.
Eric.
I don't know whether what I'm going to say is going to be helpful or not. I'm thinking again around the confusion that residents may have because of the evolving cycles of what goes out when, because some of it's weekly, some of it's 2 weeks, some of it's 3 weekly, and it won't always be the same mixture. So would it be possible, we have a big sticker on the green waste, would it be possible to have a sticker on each bin that says, these are the dates you put this bin out? You know, electronically we can do it, it's whether it's affordable and practical for us to do.
I mean, on the back of that, I mentioned earlier that I had some frustrations around the feeling that we could have been more imaginative. We're committing ourselves potentially, to 8 and potentially 16. We're going to be in a very, very different place in 16 years' time. There's mention in here of an app. I know not everybody is able to use an app, but increasingly, more and more. My 2-year-old grandson has got a mobile phone thingy. He's far more adroit with it than I am. So, you know, are we looking into introducing apps? Are we looking into having Q codes on the stickers we send out, on our bins if necessary, so that it's easy for people to find the information without having to come in, phone us, whatever. You know, and if they've got an app and a Q code that they can quickly indicate their frustration or quickly look to see when the next bin collection is, I think that would help us enormously. And I'd like to see us going down those roads. And I'd like to see some, personally, I'd like to see some resource put into the marketing and the prevention. And I haven't seen that here. Just some comments.
If it's useful for me to comment, in terms of our stickering, garden waste stickers already have a QR code on them, and we are starting to use those now more in the service. It's going to be quite key with the transformation programme here at East Herts Council that, you know, the accessibility of online forms is done very quickly. You know, people are going to still pick up the phone to us if we aren't making that easy. So we are expecting to put QR codes on all sorts of things going forwards. And Councillor McAndrew, I'm sure, will be keen to hear that the QR codes for litter bins will be going out very shortly, which will mean that residents can scan a litter bin and ensure that they can report if that is overflowing or there's another problem with it for us to address. In terms of communications and marketing, the previous report back in October 22 did support the new communications officer post, and so it will be a lot to do, you know, a lot for them to do, but it is very much part of what we need to do to make services work going forwards, ensure that residents understand why we're making changes to our services, and ensure, of course, that they all know how to use them.
Yeah, thank you for that. And the reference to, I share Graham's frustrations, and I suspect quite a few of the members with rural areas will as well. And I'd rather, Tim, take up with you offline some of the frustrations that rural members have. There seem to be quite a number of Spanish arrangements floating around about who empties what, when and why, and they're extraordinarily troublesome. And I'm sure they're across the piece, but we'll do that offline. I'm looking around. I think we got to the point where we consider the recommendation. It's on page 22 of my paginations, but such. So we are in the position where we're being asked to receive, consider and provide feedback to the executive on the proposals outlined in this report. Peter has assured me that he has captured the proposals. Graham?
I'd like to, when we do the recommendation, to take in consideration what the contract we thought was going to cost a year ago, 18 months ago, as opposed to what the future contract and less services means. I feel that this should be a decision that goes to full council, taken by all councillors and looked at in the context of the holistic East Herts budget, because we don't know what the other costs are, and we know that the GMB have just agreed an increase in wages with employers. So I think there's quite a lot to take into consideration. I don't feel it's a decision purely that the executive can take, because it impacts every single councillor on this council.
That this go to full council.
Well, it is an exec decision, which is why it's being taken by the executive. So it is normally normally the practice that a decision is taken at the lowest level that it can, council being the top and working downwards, and it being an executive decision, that there shouldn't be any need for it to go to full council. I think that would also have some knock-on effects on the timescales, because we, you know, as has been mentioned, the timescales are quite tight. adding another layer of it going to council could have quite drastic impacts on the timescales that we've already worked. Chloe will know more about what those timescales are, but it is an exec decision, and I would suggest that it be taken by the executive.
Can the executive decision be called in?
An executive decision can always be called in, but of course, you know, one of the purposes of taking it to scrutiny is for it to be scrutinised and therefore to eliminate the need for call-in. So the purpose of this committee is to hopefully allow members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee opportunity to scrutinise the matter at hand before it goes to executive. The only thing that would happen if it was called in, of course, is that we would be back here looking at it again. So it would be a rerun of tonight in effect.
Can I be very clear, though, that my view of scrutiny is post the event, not pre the event. I very much welcome the opportunity to be involved, for the committee to be involved in developing policy and developing the way forward. I welcome that. That's an important part of the Overview and Scrutiny's remit, to my mind. However, you scrutinise it afterwards. The policy is adopted. It's given to officers. Officers go away and make it happen. And somewhere down the line, when we've got, and you've heard this speech before, when we've got some data, we then scrutinise whether or not it worked. Officers did as good a job as could be expected, and we extracted from it what we intended at the outset. So this is an overview. This is a getting engaged in developing rather than scrutinising. Eric.
Yeah, I defer to James' knowledge of the legal processes and the constitution. However, as I think Graham mentioned earlier, this is of such significance financially for the council as a body, and I'm fairly sure if we were looking at doing something like this at county, it would end up at full council. So my preference would be that, regardless of the fact that the process is for executive, we should still be able to recommend it goes to full council.
I can't see any restriction on us recommending it go to full council, because ultimately we won't make that decision, but we can certainly recommend it. Just looking around the room, is there an appetite for that? We all acknowledge that it's going to affect every household. We all acknowledge it's probably the biggest cost that we are likely to incur. And given the timescales involved, if they were that sensitive, we would have been having this meeting a month ago, as did North Herts. I'm not entirely convinced by the tightness of the timescales. I still think that we need to take the time and give ourselves the sea room, when I say we collectively, to give this even more careful consideration. On the question of call-in, well, that's a political decision, and we are not political. Graham.
Yeah, because one of my concerns is the length of time it's actually taken on its journey to get here, and we could have had more time, but we are where we are.
Everybody's looking at me. Back to page 22, to receive, consider and provide feedback to the executive on the proposals outlined in this report. Is there any feeling and support in the chamber for that recommendation to add something to the effect that we recommend that this go on in due course to full council? George.
That's a fair point. I forgot that, but you probably heard me, and that's my reasoning. If anyone else would like to weigh in, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think it should not go to full council.
Sorry, thank you. In closing, could I just make the point that I think we could have done even better service to this report had we had the opportunity to have a little bit more time and potentially some briefing in the form of a note or a session, so that we could have as good an understanding. I made the point earlier, half of us, more than half of us, only joined in May. Only 2 of us in this room today were involved in the considerable amount of work that Chloe coordinated and facilitated over the last 18 months. And that has informed our views around this. I really think that I would encourage officers to look very carefully at this, and executive members and the administration more generally, to give us the opportunity to do a better job for them. That's it. Thank you very much. There is no urgent business. So at approaching at 20:51, I close the meeting. Thank you so much for your time.